this kind of invitation, and thank you, Martin, for giving me this opportunity to show you some of our preliminary results of mentalization or reflective functioning in adults suffering from attention hyperactivity disorder. So I'm not going to give you an overview of mentalization because you probably know everything now due to the previous speakers, but I'm going to give you a bit overview or a bit of background. But what is ADHD? Probably some of you don't know what it is in adults, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it is. So first of all, ADHD is a very more frequent disorder. So it has a prevalence in childhood around 5 to 7%. So it's the most prevalent disorder in childhood. And it persists in adulthood up to 60 to 70% of the cases. So it has a prevalence of 4% in adults. So it's as frequent as borderline personality disorder. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it arises during the development in childhood and is believed to impact the personality development through possible disruption of the interaction with the caregivers. It's even thought to be a very strong risk factor for borderline personality disorder. 50% of borderline personality disorder subjects had ADHD in childhood. So this is very important to address this issue. This is why it's probably very important to look at mentalization or mentalizing capacities in this population. So in childhood, ADHD is more prevalent in boys than girls. It's not the case in adulthood. So the prevalence is really similar in women and men. So there are several reasons for that. I'm not going to explain that. And ADHD is a DSM-5 diagnosis. So there are specific criteria you need to have to be diagnosed with the disorders. So there are attention deficit symptoms. You have 9 symptoms, and you need at least 5 of them to suffer from the disorder as adults. And there are hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms. Again, 9 symptoms, 9 specific symptoms, and you need 5 of them to have the disorder. So I'm not going into the details, and I'm not going to read all the symptoms here. Just going to show you a video of someone describing what it is to suffer from an ADHD. And I want you here, when you watch this video, to keep in mind that we are interested in the mentalizing capacities of this subject, okay? So how difficult it is for him to interact with people, and how it will be easy or not for you to interact with this guy. So I'm going to launch the video. It's going to be fast. He's talking very fastly, so try to focus your attention. I unfortunately do not have a French translation. So I'm really sorry, and I don't have subtitles, so you have to understand English. I'm really sorry for that. So let's go.
Many of these you can relate to. Go!
No...
You meet someone new and then 5 seconds after they've introduced themselves, you already forgot their name. No matter how hard you're trying to focus, whenever you're reading something like a book or a textbook, you read every single word on the page, you hear every single word in your head, yet 5 pages down the road, you have no idea what's going on or how you got there. You look at someone straight in the eyes, and rather than paying attention to what they're saying, you're trying to decide which eye you normally look at. Is it the left eye or the right eye? Or maybe it's the nose. Or the mouth. Or maybe you're supposed to look at the face as a whole, but you already forgot how to do that because now all you see is a bunch of face parts. To you, there's no such thing as sitting still. You don't realize it until someone tells you to stop, but you've either been rapidly shaking your legs, tapping your hands, or nodding your head to music that isn't there, or playing with whatever is currently in your hands, like a cell phone. You're a time traveler. You go and take a 5-minute Facebook break from work, and when you come back, it's an hour later. Sometimes you have to remind yourself to smile when you're with people, not because you don't like them or because you're upset, it's because you have a bunch of other thoughts going through your head that aren't smile-worthy. No matter how hard you try or how important the call is, when you're on the phone with someone, you have to be doing something else at the same time. You don't intentionally procrastinate, you're just most productive when you have to get something done. You work best when you're under pressure. Again, you don't intentionally procrastinate, but you can never decide what you want from a menu until you're under pressure because the waiter just got to you. You have a bunch of incomplete things because you're always jumping from one thing to the next. You leave your room to go get your phone that you forgot in the kitchen, but when you come back, all you have is a cup of water, snacks, and pretty much everything that's not your phone. A lot of the times that you're on the phone with people, you freak out because you can't find your phone. You're not sure if you just came downstairs or if you were about to go up. You force yourself to burp to remember what you had for lunch. When somebody tells you to think about one specific thing, you can't because now you're thinking about things, causing you to not think about what you're supposed to be thinking about. You text something that makes absolutely no sense because someone was talking to you and you write out what they were saying instead. You can remember a full phone number by repeating the numbers in your head, but the moment you start putting it into the keypad, all the different sounds from the key tones throw you off and you forget. You have to buy a lot of shampoo because when you're in the shower, you have the most thoughts and you don't even realize that you just washed your hair 3 times. You hate working in groups, not because other people have bad ideas, it's just that their ideas distract yours. You overly set reminders for yourself when important things are coming up because you know you're gonna forget. You always have these silent, awkward moments with people because when you're talking to them, you always forget what you're about to say mid-sentence, and when you do, it's like you have these, you're very indecisive. I mean, I guess this one kind of applies to everyone, or not. Or maybe, and last but not least, when you have ADHD, every single thought leads to another thought. And I actually kind of learned how to use that to my advantage when I'm coming out with videos. For example, I'm just gonna freestyle something right now just to show you how my brain works. See, you could be thinking about this video and your mind could...
So, obviously, it's not easy to interact with him. So he's not suffering from borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, or any other disorders, but obviously, he doesn't have a good mentalizing capacity, okay? So it's difficult for him to interact with people due to the symptoms, okay? Due to attentional symptoms, perceived symptoms, hyperactive symptoms. So ADHD is considered an executive dysfunction disorder. And obviously, from what you've just seen, studies, not surprisingly, have found that ADHD subjects, as child or as adults, have deficits in theory of mind. They also have, not surprisingly, impaired emotion recognition. So it's difficult for them to recognize the emotion. They're not watching at you. So it's difficult to interact and to recognize the emotion on the face of someone. And they also, not surprisingly, have impaired mindfulness skills. So it's difficult for them to be at rest, to pay attention to what you're saying. And thus, all these dimensions, they explain a strong impaired social functioning in these subjects. So this is obvious from several studies showing that up to 60% of ADHD children experience rejection by their peers due to their symptoms, due to these executive symptoms: inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity. And ADHD has an impact far beyond the core symptoms. So it impacts the family functioning. The family of ADHD subjects has been shown to be more chaotic. There is a high rate of parental divorce, separation. There are sibling fights. As adults, they are more divorced, less married, and so on. There is also an education and employment dysfunction. There is a low occupational status, absenteeism, poor academic grades. So there is a very strong impact of suffering from ADHD. And finally, but not least, there is an impact on the society. So there is a difficulty in sustaining friendships. They obviously have inadequate social skills. And for researchers, this is due not only to attention deficits and not only to impulsivity or hyperactivity, but to a new dimension that has recently been raised by researchers, which is the emotional ability. So a third dimension in ADHD, which is really close to the one found in borderline personality disorders. This is why it's very interesting also to look at mentalization in this population, because it's absolutely not addressed by other therapies. So based on that, as mentalization relies on attentional control and theory of mind, it's closely linked to mindfulness skills and emotion regulation, we might postulate that ADHD have mentalization deficits. Might not be so surprising. So it's also interesting to ask this question because the aim of our study was also to think about the possible development of a mentalization-based treatment for these subjects. What is of interest to do that? So because the pharmacological treatment for adults, I'm talking about adults here, are not so effective to treat the symptoms. So there are a lot of poor responders. There are a lot of symptoms like interpersonal relationship or emotion dysregulation that are not treated by the medication. Most of the guidelines, the international guidelines, they strongly push clinicians to start with non-pharmacological intervention first. And then there are still a lot of functioning outcomes that often fail to normalize even after years of treatments. So we clearly need new strategies, also because today there are only behavioral treatments that have been recognized to be effective in ADHD. So they are indeed effective for specific symptoms, but there are still symptoms like the one I showed you, interpersonal difficulties, emotion dysregulation, that are not addressed by the behavioral traditional treatment of this disorder. So, as I said just on the last sentence, many failures remain problematic long-term, even after behavioral treatments. So we need to find new therapeutic strategies for this disorder. So this is why we started this study, and we look at mentalization capacities in ADHD subjects. So the objective of our study was to examine reflective functioning in adults suffering from ADHD and compare them to the reflective functioning of control group or of borderline personality disorder patients. And the secondary aim, which is still at the beginning, is to see if mentalization-based treatments or MBT is of interest for adults suffering from ADHD. So we recruited 100 adults suffering from ADHD, more than 100 BPD subjects, so borderline personality disorder subjects. Some of them were comorbid with ADHD, and more than 200 controls. So we assessed them for several dimensions: impulsivity, control of anger, so emotion dysregulation, severity of depression, hopelessness, mindfulness skills, and so on. I'm not going into details here. We assess the reflective functioning using the RFQ, the Reflective Functioning Questionnaire, which assesses two dimensions of reflective functioning, so certainty and uncertainty. If we look at uncertainty, is how doubtful one is that actions are intrinsically, it's difficult for me to say it in English, motivated by internal mental states. High score signal individuals who do not typically link mental state knowledge to understand actions. So more uncertain you are, more difficult is for you, or poorer you are in terms of reflective functioning. So you have a bad mentalization capacity, okay? So here are some items of the scales. So just read you the first two ones. I don't always know why I do what I do. When I get angry, I say things that I later regret, and so on and so on. Let you just 1 second to read all the items. Okay, great. So what are the results? So in red, you have the ADHD subjects. So they lied. If we just look at uncertainty, ADHD subjects lied exactly in the middle between controls on the left and borderline personality disorder on the right. So they have impaired reflective functioning, so they have impaired mentalization capacities, but they are a bit better than borderline personality disorder patients. The worst being on the right, the white box, it's the comorbid patients. So suffering from borderline and ADHD possibly had or has an additive effect. So it's worse to be on this side. What we found also that was really interesting is that we found a very strong correlation between the severity of ADHD and the mentalization. So more severe was the subject, more impaired he was in terms of reflective functioning or mentalization, okay? And the correlation was really strong. And what was interesting is that this correlation was explained not only by hyperactive impulsive symptoms, which overlap with the one found in BPD subjects, so in borderline personality disorder, but it was also and even better explained by attentional symptoms, which are clearly specific to ADHD subjects. And these are the symptoms we want to address by an MBT program specific for ADHD in adults. What we found also is that uncertainty was clearly correlated, or strongly correlated, not surprisingly, and negatively correlated to anger control. So more uncertain you were, more difficult it was for the patient to control his anger or her anger. Okay, so here it's not surprising. It's exactly what has already been shown for borderline personality disorder subjects. So in the discussion, so what we found, so our hypothesis was really true, we can say that ADHD have poor reflective functioning capacities. So this is consistent with impaired capacities in theory of mind, mindfulness, and emotion recognition that has been clearly shown in studies. It might be one of the explanations why these subjects have impaired social abilities, and this might be due to the early life adverse events that most of these subjects have during their development. Then we also found that severity of ADHD was negatively correlated with mentalizing capacities, and this was not only due to hyperactive impulsive symptoms, but also to attentional symptoms. And this is very, very important because it's really specific to ADHD subjects. That mentalization deficits are associated with emotion dysregulation, so this is not surprising. We were really expecting to find this result. And emotion dysregulation is hypothesized to be a consequence of mentalizing deficits. And this is very interesting because this is a new dimension in ADHD. So researchers are really now interested in this emotion dysregulation component in ADHD. So in conclusion, our results, they strongly argue for the assessment of mentalizing capacities. I hope I convinced you about that. So mentalizing capacities in ADHD subjects, at least in adults, that we probably need to develop MBT for mentalization-based treatment for these subjects. This is our next step, and we want to do that with Martin Debanet. I hope he's still interested by that. And but there is also other ways, further studies are needed to replicate our findings. So I thank you for your attention. I'm ready for the questions.
So we have time for questions. So while you're thinking of your questions, I'll just ask for mine. You made a very slight comparison between ADHD and borderline personality disorder, and I was wondering if you do have data in order to be more precise on their profile of mentalization. Is there any difference between borderline personality disorder and ADHD patients in terms of mentalization?
So that's a very good question. But for now, we just have the assessment I showed, so that we assessed certainty and uncertainty. What we found, I mean, the only response I can give you now is that they just lie in the middle between controls and borderline personality disorder, the ADHD ones. But we need to be more precise on what are the mentalization deficits specific to ADHD subjects. So this is our next step. In order to develop an MBT targeted ADHD treatment, because we want to possibly add to the MBT that is currently used for borderline personality disorder, some specific aspects. One, which is clearly obvious from our study, is that we need to more address the attention deficits. So how to help these people, because they still have these symptoms, even when they are treated. So it's difficult for them to pay attention to the others. They have learned that during the development. So if they have not been treated as child, they have learned to deal with people this way. So even when you treat them, it's difficult for them to be interested by the people they have in front of them. So we need to teach them that and to address the specific issue of attention deficits. I don't know if it answers your question. Not, yes?
No, I was just, you answered very clearly, thank you. And I was just wondering if you have evidence about the difference between internal mentalization and external mentalization for ADHD patients. Because you said that because of the attention deficit, they are not keen on looking at and understanding what's in the other's mind. But the guy was quite good at explaining what he was going through. So I was wondering if there would be a shift between internal and external mentalization.
I don't have the answer. So we need to study that. So, but the question is very of interest. So, but I cannot answer it now. So I might need to work a bit on the clinic of ADHD for that.
Okay, thank you. So it's time for your questions.
Okay, lovely talk, Nader. Loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Why would you doubt that? Very nice talk. I was just wondering something perhaps to study, or perhaps you have some data, some clues. Is it really a deficit in mentalizing, or could it be a motivational problem, meaning that the capacity might be present when they're calm? Like the guy who was talking sounded quite mentalizing about his own condition. Even to the extent that he could exploit that to be a hit on YouTube. But so what would happen if we would scaffold the capacity for mentalizing, support it? Would it then be kind of more or less intact capacity, which would point to a motivational kind of reward problem, which is big in ADHD research? Or would it be a mentalizing problem, which would be more a social cognition problem? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. For the motivational issue in ADHD, it has been studied, and the difficulty to be motivated to do something, like to be interested in talking to other guys around me, it's a consequence of the attention deficit. So it's something that I have learned during development because I was not able to pay attention. So I just tried, was not able to pay attention. So I started to be not motivated to interact with people. So we need to teach ADHD patients to learn these skills again. So there is a bit of motivation here, but not only. There is also, I mean, the primary symptom that is responsible of this difficulty to interact with people is the attention deficit. So, and this is an issue related to the mentalization. This is not an issue related to motivation.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. Okay, thanks.
Nader.
Tera.
I had the question because with children, often we see that you give them medication, you give a stimulant, and they have extra moments to think about how to react before they get into a fight, or they can realize that they're drifting and they can come back and pay attention.
True.
And just the medication alone can let them access their capacity to mentalize. Mentalization is generally thought of as a marker for an attachment, but this is different because you can have people with ADHD who have very good attachments, secured, organized attachments, but they have something, their brain is going too fast.
Yeah.
So it's a different problem, and I'm wondering.
It's different. I get your point. So yes, the medication.
Yeah.
So there is something really neurobiological behind. So you need to treat this patient. So the medication will definitely help this patient to mentalize, so to be able to interact with people. So this will help these patients to have a good relationship and so on, but not as good as we thought several years ago. I mean, all the studies that came out recently, they showed that these patients still have some symptoms, some difficulties in interacting with people, even if they are well medicated. Okay, so there are still emotion dysregulation that we need to address, and I'm talking about adults that have not, for most of the people we are treating, they have not been treated as children. So they grew up with these difficulties. So they learn to interact with people. They try to cope with the disorder, but it was not effective. So they have learned some bad skills, I can say that. They have not learned to pay attention to other individuals. They were not helped by the medication to do that. There are children, if you just give them medication, because it's, of course, they will not need a mentalization-based treatment, and they will not need a therapeutic intervention like the one I'm talking about, because the medication will just make these people good. But this would not be the case for all the ADHD patients.
So okay? the two follow-up questions. One, have you studied before and after medication change in reflective functioning? And two,
yes.
Okay, so that's interesting. And then two, just because ADHD is very comorbid, how the comorbidity, which might be more related to attachment problems, especially if their parents had ADHD, how that plays in and how those patients might be identified to benefit from mentalization-based treatments.
Okay.
So you don't give it to everyone.
For the first point, so look at people with medication, without medication, after medication. So we have an improvement of mentalization capacity, so reflective functioning after treatment, so medical treatment, I mean pharmacological one, but they still are not so good. Okay, so they are still, you improve a bit, but it's not so effective. So they are still, they still have a lot of difficulties to interact, to recognize the emotions and so on. So it's still difficult for them, and for these people, there's clearly a need to develop a specific intervention, psychotherapeutic intervention. What was the other question?
Comorbidity.
Comorbidity.
To separate out
who's
most likely to benefit from MBT versus.
So I haven't looked at that. What I can say is that half of our subjects, they have either major depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, So there might be here an issue about attachment in this specific disorder or comorbid disorders. I haven't looked at that, so I cannot answer your question about the impact of comorbidity in this sample. So possibly I have to do that.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I just wonder whether you have any intention or whether you've looked at the relationship between the mentalization difficulties and other deficits in cognitive markers of ADHD, like executive function deficits, etc., or any one of the many markers, and to what extent that's related, to be able to tease out how you would think of them interacting with each other.
Yeah, I get it. So I can answer by two ways. We adjusted our findings on mindfulness capacities. So this is not truly a cognitive function, but it's somehow related to. And we found that even, I mean, the results we found, they were not dependent on these mindfulness capacities. So that this deficit in mentalizing that we found in ADHD, they were clearly associated to ADHD symptoms. So these are the executive symptoms: attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. They were measured, this symptom, by either self-reports or neuropsychological tests. And we found a strong correlation, independent of other measures, between the mentalization capacities and these cognitive symptoms. I don't know if I answering your question. See, because we don't have any other measures about, we assessed the neuropsychological functioning using the, cognitive performance task. I don't know if you know it. And other tests like this. And we found a strong correlation between these tests and mentalizing capacities. But I haven't looked at specific cognitive. I need to work on these results because there is a lot of data. So I need to correlate these measures with the reflective functioning.
We have time for questions, so don't hesitate.
Or for you, if the people have question for you also.
Yeah, Deacon.
I know you're being very cautious about not saying more than you can say from the research, but I'm going to really invite you to just speculate a little bit. I'm really fascinated to know, what sorts of thoughts you might have had just as early imaginings about where the focus in a mentalizing therapy for ADHD sufferers could go, because that makes me think there's so many different places in the creating time to mentalize, but teaching people to accept the inevitability that they're going to fall over again and again. So creating strategies that are more mentalizing of what to do when I realize I have fallen over is a different, downstream. I just wonder or maybe you've been very
no. I can.
What imagining?
What I can say is that what I was interested in this for ADHD subjects, because when we started to treat the subjects, so as adults, I realized that when I was interacting with them, even when they were treated, it was difficult for them to pay attention to me. So they were not really focused. They just wanted a brief answer to specific problems, but they didn't see the big picture. Their life is not so good. And I wanted to work that with them. So because we have a psychotherapeutic approach to where we're using DBT and CBT for ADHD adults. And so that was effective, but as I said from my side, and also other researchers said, it's not so good for improving the general quality of life. And I found this might be due to the interaction, because I always felt strange facing an ADHD subject. So they speak fast, even when treated. They are not listening to you, even when treated. So I wanted to use mentalization with them because I just started to use it for borderline personality disorder subjects. I found it really helpful. And I wanted to stop the subject and say how I feel when I'm facing. So I feel a bit strange. I think, okay, the medication works well, so you feel better. But when I'm talking to you, I still feel very strange in front of you because you're not listening to me. When I'm talking to you, even when you are medicated, even if you say to me that you have a very good concentration now, you're still looking at the board or at the window, and you're not listening to me, and you're not also doing all the homework I'm giving to you. So sometimes you still have excuses. And for me, here there is something in the relationship that we need to work on. And also, so to make the patient more aware of what I feel during the my meeting with the patients. So this, I think, would be addressed by mentalization or an MBT specific treatment.
I think that's very interesting because it's one way of making sense of that is that by revealing to me a little more what you feel about my ADHD behaviors, actually in my mind you become more interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
And the focus then is drawn, I'm able to focus a bit more. Because ADHD people get drawn into the interest in their own thoughts. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question about comorbidity as well. In child psychiatry, we look a lot at this broader phenotype, and up to 25% within the ADHD group will also fulfill the criteria for autism.
Yeah.
So do you distinguish between those? Because they will need, of course, this kind of approach like the autism group would.
Yeah, so we have an assessment for autism spectrum disorders. It's just a self-report questionnaire about that. And when we suspect or the questionnaire is high in terms of rating, we try to go further into the assessment of autism spectrum disorder. We have 10% of our ADHD subjects, so they are not in this study, so they have been excluded. But we have roughly 10% of our subjects who have autism spectrum disorder, like Asperger or other related syndrome.
But they could be close to the threshold anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in, did you say you do DBT with individuals with ADHD? Is that with comorbid personality disorders or just
Not
ADHD?
just DBT for ADHD. We are selling a book outside about our therapy if you want to buy it. So it's an adaptation of DBT, so including some CBT strategies also for adult ADHD. So, but without comorbidity or without BPD comorbidity.
Okay. And is it skills training or?
It's a skills training. It's really close to the DBT skills training for borderline personality disorders. But you still need to buy the books. Yeah, thank you. Buy the book, not the books, but even if there are several ones.
So we have time for last question. You can either ask a question to Deacon if there's something that just occurred to you. So if it's not the case, I think you need a tea. So it's tea break now, and thank you very much for both of you.